Hey YouTube, in this video we're going to be doing a tier list video since it was something that my viewers on my live stream said that we should do, so I decided to do this. We're going to do this one on the AM5 motherboards. This is going to be all the X670E motherboards, so from all the different vendors, including Biostar. So let's get right into it. If you like this sort of content, if you want to see more of these kind of weird tier list videos for motherboards, because this is probably something that I don't think anyone's ever done before. If you like the video, please leave a like. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do tier lists for some other computer hardware components, like maybe B650 motherboards or something like that. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this first one is going to be the ASRock X670E PG Lightning. This one is actually a pretty solid one. It's kind of lacking some of the things like, Wi-Fi, and doesn't have a postcode debug, but it's, $260 roughly. You can probably find it on sale sometimes for like $250, $240. So at that price point, though, it lacks some stuff like Wi-Fi, but it does give you all the essentials. It doesn't have the best VRM heat sinks. I mean, as you can tell how it looks, the I/O shield's not fully covered, or the I/O on the back is not fully covered with a shield, but that's not really that big of a deal. Like, it'll still get the job done. So overall, it's an average motherboard that's pretty decent overall. So it's going to go in B tier. Next, we have the ASRock X670 Pro RS. This one is going to be in C because it's more expensive than the PG, while not really doing anything different. It just looks a little bit better. So unless, I mean, it's okay. It's what, like $280 for this guy typically. So if you want to pay like $30, $40 more for basically the same motherboard, yeah, go ahead. Because this one, I don't think it has Wi-Fi either. So kind of a wash there. Next we have the X670E Steel Legend. So this one, I actually like this one. I think this one is actually one of ASRock's best AMD motherboards this generation. So the Steel Legend, it comes with a GPU support bracket, so an anti-sag bracket that's included with this motherboard. It also does come with an X4 PCIe slot to the chipset. And what that means is that allows you to add a Thunderbolt add-in card from ASRock. It also allows you the option to add a 4K 60 capture card, like an Elgato 4K 60 or an Avermedia 4K. I mean, those are the sort of the capture cards that I'd recommend. So it gives you the functionality that you'd expect, and it's at $300. Typically, you can find it on sale for as low as like $270. At that price, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's definitely one of the better motherboards overall. The only thing that it really lacks is the debug code. There's no debug LED code. Next we have the ASUS X670E ROG Strix Gaming Wi-Fi. This one's going to be in D. The only Strix motherboard that is worth considering is going to be the E-E, which we will talk about in a little bit. So the reason why this guy's in D tier is because it is a 400 plus, it's like 420 to 450 in terms of the price of this motherboard. But it doesn't really do anything that kind of justifies that price point in my mind. Like, if this guy was more like 350, then it would probably be, somewhere up here. But because it doesn't do any of those things, it's like over $400. It doesn't have a postcode debug. It gives you the heat sinks for the M.2, whereas some of these other cheaper ones were lacking that. But it's just, I'm of the opinion, if you're spending over $400, if you're spending around like $420 to $450 on a motherboard, you might as well fork over an extra like $30 or whatever and get one that has a postcode, get one that's considered like the flagship of that line. So for instance, the Strix E-E is the best Strix motherboard. So I would probably just recommend that you get that one. It's a little bit more money than this, depending on the sale price at the time. But yeah, I just don't think this one's really worth it in terms of what it offers over some of these. Let's do this one. This one's also going to be D. So this one is the Strix. This is the X670E-F ROG Strix Gaming Wi-Fi. So it's like the only thing that these two do that like these ASRock boards don't do is these guys have Wi-Fi. And it's like, okay, Wi-Fi 6E on a desktop. It's like, do you really want to spend $150 more for that? Not really. So it's basically adding Wi-Fi and M.2 heat sinks. That's essentially what they're doing. So I might as well spend a little bit more and get a postcode debug on the Strix E-E. So let's see what else we've got here. So let's do the let's do another like D tier. So this one right here, this ASUS X670E ROG Strix gaming Wi-Fi. This one is also going to be a D tier because it's ITX and it's literally the only ITX X670E motherboard. But the problem is, in my mind, if you want ITX, you should probably buy a lower end chipset, like a B650, for example, because those are just way more cost effective and they give you the exact same functionality. The only thing really that this has going for it is Thunderbolt. So yeah, this thing does have Thunderbolt. So it's like, I want to say it's C tier because it has Thunderbolt. And that's kind of cool because it's very, very small form factor and you can get full PCIe tunneling over, you know, on an AMD motherboard, but it's basically supporting Thunderbolt. So it's like, I want to like it, but it's like $470, and it's like, I can't justify spending $470 on an ITX motherboard, if that makes sense, even though it has Thunderbolt. So it's like, I kind of want to say this is C. You know what? I'll probably just say it's C, because it's the same amount of money as these guys, but it's like, this actually has Thunderbolt 40 gig USB, and these guys don't. So it's like, you can also do some interesting things with this in terms of small form factor. So it's like, yeah, I'll say it's C. It's I guess it's C at best. Next, let's look at the Prime. So this one, so the ASUS X670E Pro Prime Wi-Fi. This one is probably going to be another B. It's $350, so it's more money than the ASRock one that's like $260. So it's like $100, $90 to $100 more than the ASRock. The difference is it gives you more M.2 heat sinks. It gives you a better looking board aesthetically. It's still lacking the debug LED codes and stuff like that. It does give you decent expansion slots for PCIe, but that's about it. Overall, it's an okay choice. It's kind of a solid B in my mind. Next, the other one that I'll want to do from ASUS is let's do the Tough. So the Tough is actually, I kind of think the Tough is a pretty good choice. I'm going to say it's a B tier also. It's a little bit cheaper than the Prime. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you're looking for a white, silverish build, then the Prime actually makes sense. If you want black, then get the Tough. Alright, so next we have the ASRock Taichi Carrara. So right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and say this one's an A tier. If you're going for a white build, premium board that has USB 4, aka Thunderbolt 4 support, and all the 24 lanes of Gen 5, this is a good one. And the Taichi is basically going to be the same. So it's like, if you want a black build, black motherboard, get the Taichi. If you want a white motherboard, although granted it's a marble finish white, so it's going to look a little bit strange, but with the LED lighting and stuff in the case, it'll probably look really good. So these are solid choices from ASRock overall. The Taichi Carrara and the Taichi. They have the full USB 4 Thunderbolt. The only thing that's keeping these guys, these could have been S tier actually. Both of these could have been S tier. The thing that kind of prevents them from being S tier is the fact that ASRock chose to wire the Thunderbolt controller to the CPU lanes instead of the expansion lanes. And for some reason, what they didn't do, they didn't give us any separate X4 expansion slot. Like they have an X8 and they have the standard X16. The X8 shares lanes with the GPU. So it's like you don't have any expandability, and that really hurts this motherboard in my mind. It's almost like you have to either make use of the 40 gig USB Thunderbolt for like an external 4K 60 capture card, or whatever Thunderbolt use case you want to do. In that regard, though, like, these guys could have been perfect. The Taichi boards could have been perfect, but they just kind of missed the mark because they don't have any PCI expansion slots that are either from the CPU or from the chipset. So those are $500 motherboards, but they're kind of really, really good. If you really want Thunderbolt, they're solid choices. So next we have the ProArt Creator from ASUS. This one's going to be in B tier, although it's going to be pretty high up there on the B tier list. So this guy's a $500 motherboard from ASUS. The reason why it's not A tier like Taichi is because it doesn't have a postcode debug LED, whereas the Taichi motherboards do have that. And if I'm going to spend $500 on a motherboard, I want that postcode. I should not have to pay a crazy amount of money. Now, granted, $500 for the postcode is a crazy amount of money, but ASUS is charging $500 for the ProArt Creator, and it doesn't have the postcode debug. However, it does have DisplayPort input, so it does actually make use of all the Thunderbolt features from that Intel controller. So, that is something nice about it, but it's like, needs to either be $50 less or it needs to have that postcode for it to be an A tier. So now we have a lot of the $500 motherboards, and then we have like the $700 motherboards, and then the ridiculously overpriced 1000 plus motherboards. So let's do the ASUS Strix E. So the ASUS Strix E-E is actually an okay choice. There isn't really anything that's keeping it from being in A tier in my mind. The only thing is the documentation is lousy, so you don't really know how things are. You don't know 100% how some of the lanes on the chipset are allocated. You have to make intelligent guesses with the ASUS motherboards. So the thing about the Strix and the Creator is if these two motherboards fused together, the combined motherboard would have either been A or S. But because they're both $500, the difference is the Creator is $500 and has USB 4, but doesn't have a postcode debug. The Dash E Strix is a $500 motherboard too, but it doesn't have the Thunderbolt, but it does have the postcode debug. So technically, it's like if you want Thunderbolt, get the ProArt. If you want the debug and you're going to tweak and overclock and you're not going to use Thunderbolt, but you might want to be able to add it, then this guy would be a better choice overall. So the Strix E, in my mind, is kind of the replacement to what the Crosshair Hero motherboard used to be from ASUS, because ASUS has just power crept the Crosshair brand up every generation, it seems. So let's do Biostar. So Biostar's motherboard is actually, I want to say Biostar's Valkyrie is S tier, but it's probably A tier because it doesn't have good documentation. But they did really good choices with their lane placements for their PCIe slot placements. It has debug code, it has Wi-Fi, it basically has everything that you would want on an ATX form factor. So it's kind of better than the Taichi motherboards, but not really. It just lacks a lot of support. So it's like, does Thunderbolt work on it? Maybe. If so, does Biostar have an add-in card? If not, does one of the other vendors' cards work with it, provided the header is the same? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I want to say this is an S-tier motherboard, but at the same time, it's just not. It's never available anywhere, and the support and the documentation is somewhat lacking, so I guess that's kind of why it's not an S-tier motherboard. Okay, so now we have the MSI. Let's talk about MSI's Carbon Wi-Fi. So MSI's Carbon Wi-Fi might actually be one of the most perfect ATX motherboards for AMD. Maybe the Valkyrie might actually be S tier as well. But to be S tier, you have to be like near perfect. So the one Achilles heel of the Carbon Wi-Fi. So the Carbon Wi-Fi is essentially MSI's $500-ish motherboard, just like the Taichi from ASRock. But the Carbon Wi-Fi has one big weakness. It's almost like it has the opposite weakness of the Taichi. So this motherboard doesn't have the ability to add USB 4 at all. Like, absolutely no. So you cannot add Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 at all on any of the MSI X670E motherboards, at least the ones that exist in this first generation. If this had the ability to add Thunderbolt, this would actually be an S-tier motherboard. At around $500, typically it's around like $480, so it has a price advantage over the Taichi. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you want Thunderbolt and you're not going to plug in expansion cards, get the Taichi. If you don't care about Thunderbolt, but you might want to use like a capture card, get the MSI. That's kind of the way I look at it. But because they don't give you the option to do one or the other, they're both A tier. So an example of an S tier motherboard would be a motherboard that can do both. So that would be the AORUS Master. So the X670E AORUS Master, not only does it have the PCIe slot lane allocations for supporting external or internal capture cards or PCIe peripherals, it actually supports Thunderbolt. So you can add the Thunderbolt add-in card to it, and you can enable USB 4 full PCIe tunneling support. So a lot of that kind of functionality is what I would have liked to see in either the Carbon Wi-Fi from MSI or give me another X4 slot at the bottom of the motherboard on the Taichi, and then those two motherboards would have also been S-tier motherboards, just like the Gigabyte board. It also helps that the Gigabyte board tends to benchmark better than the others. If you look at hardware unboxed testing and that sort of thing, the Gigabyte boards this generation, at least on the AMD side of the house, do really, really well. So the AORUS Master is definitely one of the best ones. And you'll see a lot of the reviewers are using this very motherboard as their kind of like motherboard of choice when it comes to benchmarking these recent CPUs, like the 7800X3D, for example. So this is a $500 motherboard from Gigabyte, and I would say $500 is kind of the ceiling in terms of if you spend more than $500 on a motherboard, you're hitting diminishing returns and you're not getting a whole lot more for the money at that point. So AORUS Master is kind of the ceiling in terms of the functionality. So it has the capability to do USB 4, just like the Taichi, although it doesn't include it the way the Taichi does, but it does give you the choice. And if I had to choose between, do I want Thunderbolt or do I want the ability to add Thunderbolt but then have the option to do other things with my lanes, I would go for the latter. So that's why the AORUS wins. Next we have, let's get this Crosshair Gene out of the way. So the Crosshair Gene is going to be another C-tier motherboard from ASUS. I almost want to say this is a B-tier motherboard, but the problem with it is just way too expensive. This is an MATX motherboard that is $600. So I can't justify $600 for MATX when I just said all these things about the AORUS Master, and you can't really do any of those things on a smaller motherboard. So you might as well, ASUS should have probably gone with a lower end chipset, and they could have priced this significantly lower, or they could have just priced this lower, you know, at like $450 or something, and then it probably would have placed significantly higher on this list. So now we've got the really expensive, insultingly expensive motherboards that remain. So let's go ahead and do the Crosshair Hero. So those of you that have been following me for a while know that I have always been a big fan of the ASUS Crosshair ROG series. I have the ASUS Crosshair 5 Formula Z for the FX8350. I have the Crosshair 6 Hero, the X370 for Ryzen 1st Gen. And then I have the X570 Crosshair 8 Hero Wi-Fi. So what I noticed over each generation is the price of Crosshair has always crept up. Like some kind of crazy power creep. It's just gone up. So now this guy is at $700. And at $700, this is probably just going to be in A tier. I almost wanted to say B tier. But the thing that this does that the other ASUS motherboards that are cheaper than it don't do is it offers you USB 4. So it has the Thunderbolt controller. It has basically everything you need, everything you expect if you're someone who wants to tweak and overclock the motherboard, and it has all the RGB if you want to make it look really good. It does have that going for it. Where it falls short compared to the AORUS Master is it does not have a separate X4 expansion slot that the AORUS Master offers. So instead, what ASUS does is they give you an X8, which shares lanes with the graphics card slot, and then they give you an X1. Now that X1 is so useless in 2023, I cannot emphasize that enough, because at $700, I can't plug in my 4K capture card in this motherboard without sacrificing half of my GPU lanes. I really don't want to do that. That's the reason why I would go with the $200 cheaper Gigabyte motherboard over something like this. So that's why, unfortunately, this is the first generation where I have actually abstained from going with the de facto Crosshair that I usually upgrade to based off of my history. And I've actually went with a different brand this time around, that being the Gigabyte AORUS Master. So it's unfortunate because I want to like the Crosshair Hero, but it is so expensive and it just doesn't really do what I need it to do at the price point that they're selling it at. So it's going to have to be a hard pass. Let's go ahead and get the MSI Meg Ace out of the way. So the MSI Meg Ace is MSI's best motherboard. In fact, this might actually be the absolute best AM5 motherboard of this generation. So The Meg is an EATX motherboard, just like the AORUS Master. However, it gives you, it's $200 more, so it's about $700, so just like the Crosshair. However, unlike the Crosshair, this motherboard includes an X4 PCIe Gen 5 slot. And that alone justifies that $700 price, because that is something that you can't actually do with the Master. And not only that, the Meg Ace also includes a PCIe Gen 5 expander card, just like the Crosshair. But the thing is, like, it still gives you the ability to do, you know, X16, X8, and then X4. And that X4 is huge. And the fact that it's a full Gen 5 speed on that bottom PCIe slot basically makes it the king of all the motherboards, in terms of, it's the only one that can actually justify its $700 asking price. The one Achilles heel that this doesn't have, just like the other MSI motherboards, it does not have Thunderbolt support on AMD. So that could potentially drop this guy down into A tier, because that's its Achilles heel. But I'm willing to overlook that just because it gives you the full Gen 5 experience. And it also includes extra goodies like that expander card for more storage capabilities. So that's why I'll let it be kind of in that S tier bracket, because of those features that it gives you. Now we're left with the 3 remaining flagships. So we've got the ROG Xtreme, the Gigabyte AORUS Xtreme, and then we have the MSI GODLIKE. So the MSI GODLIKE, I'm just going to go ahead and drop this guy down to like fail tier, because I want to like it. I really do want to like this motherboard, but it's an example of a motherboard that doesn't do the things that it should do at that price point. So this motherboard is $1,300. And $1,300, it is almost double the price of the Ace, of MSI's second best AM5 motherboard. But in reality, you don't get anything with this that you can't do with the Ace. The one thing that this motherboard should have included, and I know this is going to sound really, really niche, but this motherboard should have included SLI licensing from NVIDIA, because originally, before the release of this motherboard, I think I remember correctly, the documentation mentioned SLI support. So this was technically supposed to be the only SLI motherboard of this generation, but I think they kind of backtracked on that, and it doesn't have SLI support. If I'm incorrect, someone correct me in the comments, because I'd really like to know the clarification on whether or not the GODLIKE supports SLI, because none of these other motherboards, nor do any of the Intel Z790 motherboards, support SLI. So SLI is effectively dead now, but I feel like the GODLIKE's claim to fame could have been SLI support. It not having that kind of makes it a big fail in my mind. So at that price point, the price point just kills it and drops it all the way down to D tier. So that kind of leaves these two. So the Gigabyte AORUS Xtreme is also going to be a big fail in my book. It's $700, just like the Crosshair Hero. I guess, well, it's a little bit better than these ones, so I guess it'll be B, because it's $700, but $700 doesn't do anything for you. Like, the difference between the Xtreme and the Master is the Xtreme runs all of the M.2 drives off of the CPU lanes. So if you run your third and fourth M.2, it's stealing lanes from the graphics card. So that's a little bit too much of a compromise in my mind. It is offering 4 M.2 drives, all at Gen 5 speed, just like what Ace can do, but Ace does that using an expander card and using the X8 slot. So Ace does it as an option, whereas AORUS is kind of like, this is your only option. So I don't really like that, and I can't really... It just doesn't do anything at $700 that the Ace doesn't do better. The one thing going for it is you can add Thunderbolt to it, just like the Master, but it's like, why would I spend $200 to have less flexibility with my M.2 drives when I could just save that $200 and get better flexibility? So the last motherboard is going to be the Xtreme. The Xtreme is going to actually, you guys are going to be surprised, the Xtreme is probably going to be an A. It could be S. It could be S, but The thing is, it's $1,000, so it's not stupid crazy $1,300 like the GODLIKE, but it does offer something the Crosshair Hero doesn't offer, which is that coveted X4 slot that's independent of the graphics card. So just like with the Meg and the Master and the Carbon, this guy does have that. So ASUS just manages to scrape by and actually have an S-tier motherboard, although it is exceptionally expensive. It is almost the no compromise board. It has your X4. It has USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 included on the motherboard, so you don't need an add-in card, which you would have to get for the Master. But hey, this is twice as much money as the Master. I mean, it has all that RGB stuff going for it too. It has the debug code. It has the special DIM.2 or Gen Z or whatever they call that thing that comes with the Crosshair, so it's got that thing as well. So it has basically the full experience. You throw a lot of money at a problem, you get a really good result, and that's kind of what the Crosshair Xtreme represents. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with this tier list, what you think it should be different, and let me know your reasoning behind that. If you like this content, please leave a like. It does help me out. And if you want to see more videos like this, let me know in the comments what sort of content like this would you like to see, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks.